Imagine waking up one morning, standing in front of the mirror and realizing the face is still yours, but the feeling is completely unfamiliar. This isn't just a fleeting thought. It's an experience many celebrities have gone through. It's not about small changes that make them look a little better, but about a transformation significant enough to make them relearn how to live with their new selves. The point is, we often only see the final result. A before and after photo, a different body, a few compliments on social media. But all that truly creates that transformation lies behind the scenes, where there are no lights, no editing, just the same choices repeated every day. It's about those mornings when no one sees them still diligently working out. Those times they wanted to quit, but still persevered another day. And those moments of self-doubt when things don't seem to be progressing as expected. If you could see the entire journey from beginning to end without editing, embellishing, or simplifying, would you still view those transformations in the same way as before? The answer might not be as simple as you think. Roseanne Barr never tried to be the ideal image Hollywood expected, and that's what set her apart from the start. For a long time, she was more than just a television star. She represented a rare kind of authenticity on screen, unpolished, unconventional, and not trying to hide her real life. A working-class woman, straightforward, frank, and always appearing true to herself. Some loved that approachability, others disagreed, but no one could deny that image had become her signature. And for a long time, it seemed no one thought that would change. But then, behind the glitz and glamour, a quiet process began. No fanfare, no announcements, no need for public attention. Just small changes repeated day by day in private, away from cameras and spotlights. Until Roseanne reappeared, the transformation was so striking that it astonished many. It came quickly, almost unexpectedly, leading the public to question what they were actually seeing. She herself described the process simply: eating more, exercising more. But behind those brief words lay a difficult journey, demanding discipline, perseverance, and confronting habits that had existed for years. And the story wasn't just about physical change. It became a story about control, not just over one's body, but over how one is perceived. Roseanne Barr didn't simply change her appearance, but she broke free from the molds others had imposed on her for so long. And from that, a question arises. When a person changes enough to no longer resemble their old image, have they truly become a different person? Or have they simply finally been seen for who they truly are? Carey used to be the kind of person who could make himself part of the laughter, and audiences completely accepted that. In the world of comedy, his appearance wasn't just a secondary factor, it gradually became a familiar part of his public persona. His weight was mentioned in comedic situations, in scripts, and even in how people perceived him. It all happened so naturally that no one questioned when it started. But then there were signs that couldn't be ignored. When the chest pains appeared, the story immediately took a different turn. It was no longer about laughter on stage or familiar roles, but a clear warning about his health. The subsequent emergency angioplasty not only saved him from danger, but also confronted an unavoidable truth. The issue was no longer about image, but about survival. After that event, Drew didn't make a big fuss or make any major statements. He chose to remain silent and focus on a long process of transformation, away from the spotlight and public attention. His diet was strictly adjusted, exercise became a habit, and most importantly, he had to completely change habits that had been ingrained in him for years. It wasn't an easy process, nor did it happen quickly. But over time, the change began to show. His appearance changed significantly. Leaner, healthier, and with a greater sense of control over his life than before. However, what makes Carey's story remarkable isn't just his new appearance. It's the reason behind it. Because sometimes change doesn't come from a desire to reinvent oneself, but from a moment when you are forced to choose between continuing as before or starting over to survive. Graham Elliot is the kind of person many believe reached the pinnacle of his career early on. A talented chef, a television personality, and an icon of success in the world of fine dining. Appearing on big stages like MasterChef, he projected an image of confidence, composure, and complete mastery of his field. However, behind the spotlight lay a harsh reality. His body changed over time, his weight reaching around 400 pounds, over 180 kilograms. Simple daily activities became increasingly difficult, clearly reflecting a worrying health condition. And the turning point came in 2013, when he made the crucial decision to undergo gastric bypass surgery. This wasn't a quick fix, but the beginning of a journey that would completely transform his lifestyle. For someone who has dedicated their life to cooking and enjoying food, changing their eating habits was not only a physical challenge, but also a prolonged mental struggle. After the surgery, everything in his life had to be readjusted from scratch. A stricter diet, more disciplined habits, and self-control became a daily necessity. There was no easy path, only persistent repetition of small steps over time. And the results began to come faster than expected. In just a few months, he lost about 130 pounds, almost 60 kilograms, resulting in a dramatic change in appearance that many found difficult to recognize. But the most important thing in Graham Elliott's journey wasn't the numbers on the scale. It was the change in how he viewed food and himself. When what was once your passion and the center of your life becomes your greatest challenge, overcoming it isn't simply about losing weight. It's a process of redefining your lifestyle and yourself from within. Missy Elliott never needed to conform to stereotypes to stand out. She created her own standard. In an industry that heavily emphasizes image and outward perfection, Missy emerged with an unmistakable style, breaking familiar boundaries and reshaping how people perceive hip-hop. Her talent and personality were strong enough to render physical standards secondary. She wasn't just a successful artist, she was a pioneering icon. However, behind the dazzling spotlight lay a completely different journey, one that unfolded quietly and little known. In 2008, Missy Elliott was diagnosed with Graves' disease, an autoimmune disorder that can affect many systems in the body, from the nervous system to the cardiovascular system. At this point, the story was no longer about image or public pressure, but became a purely personal and health issue. Her transformation didn't begin with a desire to change her appearance, but with the need to adapt in order to continue living and working normally. When the public began to notice the difference in her appearance, what they saw was only the tip of the iceberg of a long process unfolding behind the scenes, a battle without a script, without preparation, and without shortcuts. Instead of retreating, Missy chose to confront it. She adjusted her lifestyle, maintained a regular exercise routine, kept strict discipline, and prioritized her health. Each small change accumulated over time, creating a more stable process rather than a sudden transformation. She lost about 30 pounds, but that number wasn't the most important thing. More remarkable was how she adapted to a body that no longer functioned as before and continued to be creative, continuing to thrive in the demanding industry. Over time, the change became more apparent, but not ostentatious. This isn't a dramatic transformation for the sake of attention, but rather the result of perseverance and self-control over a long period. Ultimately, Missy Elliott's story isn't just about appearance or weight. It's about how a person can continue moving forward, even when their body is forced to change the way it operates. Josh Peck didn't change in an instant. It was a long, subtle process that many didn't even notice. In the audience's memory, he was associated with the chubby, funny teenager in Drake and Josh, a familiar, lovable role that gradually became the stereotype people had of him. Over time, the line between the character and Josh's true self almost blurred in the public eye. But behind the laughter on screen was an unspoken pressure. It wasn't just about his appearance, but about how he was perceived, repeated expectations, pre-established definitions he never chose. Hollywood had inadvertently created a fixed version of him, and gradually, that version became what people expected. There was no dramatic turning point. No announcements or landmark events. It was just small changes, repeated every day, eating more moderately, exercising more regularly, and persevering even when no one was watching. Then one day, when he reappeared, the difference was clear. It was still the same familiar face, but his eyes and demeanor had changed. Calmer, more confident, and he seemed to be truly in control of his life. The most important thing wasn't the new appearance. It was that he was no longer defined by his old image. No magic, no shortcuts, just a long process of discipline, patience, and self-awareness. Josh Peck didn't erase his old self. He simply stepped out of that shadow. And in a very quiet way, he rewrote his own story. Not to change how others perceived him, but to become the person he truly wanted to be. Kirstie Alley used to be the kind of star audiences believed was always in control, at least based on what they saw on screen. During her peak with Cheers, she embodied the quintessential Hollywood star, captivating, confident, and almost flawless. But behind the spotlight lay a journey she never fully concealed, a complex relationship with eating, with periods of imbalance that only those involved truly understood. Then the change came, not as a shock, but as a quiet process of time. As she entered menopause, her body began to function differently. Her metabolism slowed, her weight gradually increased, not abruptly, but enough to create a noticeable difference over the years. And after a while, the familiar image of Kirstie in the public eye was gradually replaced by a different version, leading to gossip, scrutiny, and then misunderstandings. But her story was never a straight line. It was more like a series of loops, rising, falling, then changing again. There were times when she lost a significant amount through support programs and a strict lifestyle, but then things wouldn't stay the same. And each time, the public turned it into a new story to discuss. Even so, she didn't stop. After each start over, Kirstie continued with a different determination, a different approach, and the courage to still appear in public during her most imperfect phases, like when she participated in Dancing with the Stars, where she showed that her efforts were not just about appearance, but also about perseverance. What makes Kirstie Alley's journey remarkable is not just the transformation in her appearance, but it's the pressures that come with it. Expectations, judgments, and the long struggle to regain control in a world that constantly views people through very strict standards. Because sometimes the heaviest burden isn't the change in the body, but how the world perceives that change. Jonah Hill once made the world laugh, but few realized that behind that was a man almost boxed in by his own laughter. For years, he was associated with a familiar image, the funny, slightly clumsy guy, often appearing in roles like Superbad. His appearance gradually became an inseparable part of the character, to the point that audiences automatically assumed it was Jonah's true self. And Hollywood reinforced this, because it was effective, easily recognizable, and marketable. But then, a question began to emerge, not loudly but clearly. If the whole world only sees you through one mold, do you still have the chance to become someone completely different? Jonah Hill chose to answer that question through a path that was far from easy. He didn't simply want to change his appearance. He wanted to break free from the version the public had written for him. That meant confronting years of ingrained habits, the pressures of the profession, and the unspoken expectations from the very industry that had made him famous. There were no quick fixes, only discipline, rigorous training, a strict diet, and persistent daily repetition, even when no one was watching. The change didn't happen instantly, but when it began to become apparent, the whole world took notice. The question was repeated everywhere. Is this really Jonah Hill? The familiar face was still there, but everything else seemed to have changed, more refined, calmer, confident in a very different way. But the most important thing wasn't his appearance. As Jonah changed, the way the world saw him changed too. New roles began to appear, no longer confined to a single type of character. He proves that he's not just a fixed, comedic role, but an actor capable of expanding, developing, and redefining himself. And this story raises a bigger question. How many people out there are being seen through a label they didn't choose? And if one day they change, are we ready to see them in a completely different way? If you're watching this far, ask yourself, did you recognize Jonah Hill at first glance after he changed? Mama June, a name once synonymous with controversy, gossip, and almost no room for public sympathy. For years, June Shannon appeared not just as a reality TV personality, but as a target of criticism. Her appearance, her past, her lifestyle, everything was scrutinized. Over time, her image in the eyes of many narrowed, as if her entire being was reduced to what was seen on screen. And then, just when most viewers thought the story had closed, things took a different turn, not with a subtle or gradual change, but with a very clear decision. June spent a large sum of money, approximately $75,000, on her transformation, including weight loss surgery and cosmetic procedures. It wasn't just about appearance. It was an effort to break free from the old image that had been ingrained in her for years. The results came so quickly and dramatically that it was overwhelming. Over 300 pounds, approximately 136 kilograms, disappeared from her body. The change was so drastic that many people no longer recognized the old June. It wasn't just a simple transformation. It was more like a complete rebirth. But the hardest part of this journey wasn't losing the weight. It was maintaining it. Maintaining a new body meant changing her entire lifestyle, eating habits, daily routines, discipline, and even how she faced herself each day. It wasn't something that could be sustained by fleeting inspiration. It was a silent, repetitive battle, without the spotlight or public attention. And that's why Mama June's story isn't just about numbers or appearance. It raises a much more difficult question. Can a person truly leave behind their old self, or does the past always try to pull them back? If you've watched this far, please share your thoughts. Do you think a person can completely change? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue following the next stories.